Welcome to the Spaghetti Dream Frock tutorial. Seam allowance is included in the pattern and is 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters everywhere unless otherwise mentioned. I'm sewing a size 8. Style A has the shoulder strap construction and Style B has the sleeves construction. Both can be sewn with or without a zipper due to the faux shirring panel, and with an option of either an A-line skirt, skirt, or gathered peplum. I have 3 samples for the spaghetti strap Style A. The first is light pink with an A-line skirt, the second is a green linen to show the zipper insertion, and the third is in the same green linen to show the peplum application. I have 1 sample for the puffed sleeve Style B. It's hot pink with the gathered skirt construction, and zipper construction is also included. There will always be a caption above indicating which style or styles the current instructions pertain to, as well as chapter titles and my voice prompts. This portion of the video contains instructions for Style A with the A-line skirt. To incorporate the straps, cut your pattern piece 4 according to the diagram. We are going to start with the bust tie straps, so use an 18mm bias tape maker to fold the sides of your straps to the center, then press the folds together. It's also easy enough to fold the sides in by hand if you don't own a bias tape maker like this. Also note that the straps for Style A are cut on fold. Fold one end of each strap, then sew across the folded end and the long folded edge to create 2 straps. Also, here's a tip: I like to use a piece of lightweight paper to get the stitch started. I've tried sewing this in a tube, but with this linen fabric, it was really difficult to turn out. So this is the way that I like to do it that works. Moving on to the bust cups. Place your bust cups right sides together and sew across the top at 1/2 inch or 13mm. Then open the seam and understitch on the inner bust cup. Understitching is when you fold the seam allowance to one side, the inside of the garment, and stitch really close to the seam. At the center front of each bust cup, fold in 1/4 inch or 6mm twice and sew along the folded edge. At the armholes, snip the notches so that they are a full 1/2 inch and fold that section to the wrong side of the bust cups. Sew 2 rows of stitches, one close to the folded edge and the other close to the raw edge. After this is done, place your bust cups right sides together and sew the rest of the armhole. Trim the armhole, then turn it out and press it. Sew 2 rows of stitches across the top of the bust cups. The first should be 1/2 inch or 13mm from the seam, and the second should also be 1/2 inch or 13mm from the first stitch. This creates the ruffle and the bust tie strap channel. And you may be wondering why I'm turning my work 180 degrees and sewing forward instead of backstitching. This is just a neater way of starting and ending a backstitch. I just want it to be as neat as possible. It's front and center on the garment, so this is how I make that happen. At this point, I fed through the bust tie straps, but I highly recommend that you don't do this until after we sew the ties to the back shoulder seams. It'll be so much less confusing and you won't have to re-feed in the tie straps. Locate the notches along the base of the bust cups and sew 2 rows of basting stitches between them. Sew your first stitch at 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters from the edge and the second stitch 5/8 of an inch or 1.6 centimeters from the edge. Then gather the base of the bust cups. They will be adjusted later to match the front bodice. Sew a pair of stitches 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter apart down the center of the 2 center front bodice panels to create a boning channel. Place this center front bodice wrong sides together and then stitch the center channel. Insert a piece of boning that is 4 7/8 of an inch or 12.4 centimeters long. This length leaves room for stitching the seam allowance on the top and bottom. And just a note, we're not putting boning in the rest of the bodice. You can if you want, but I like to put it in the center front because it preserves the shape of the center front point. To create boning channels for the rest of the seams, you can simply sew a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter stitch from each finished seam to create a channel for your boning. The boning needs to be a full 1 1/4 inch shorter than the full length of each unsewn seam. Next, we're going to add the side panels. So we're going to sandwich the center front panel between the 4 side panels, 2 on each side. And we're sandwiching it between the right sides of these side panels. Sew together, then top stitch close to the seam. Next, we're going to place the armhole area of the side panels right sides together and sew them. Then we're going to trim and clip the curve and then turn out and press. It is now time to apply the bodice to the cups. Line up your bust cup edge to the side front bodice curve right sides together. Wrap the lining side of the side front bodice to face the lining side of the bust cup so that the bust cup is sandwiched between the 2 layers of the side front bodice. Pin in place for about a 1 1/2 inch or 3 to 4 centimeter section. And then we're going to sew about 1.5 inches in, or 3 to 4 centimeters. That's really all you need to start it and clean finish the edge. Of course, you can just sew this together without flipping the one side around and then just overlock it and leave it as is. You can do that for the entire top. I just like to do this because it really cleans it up and makes it look really nice. Once this is done, you're going to cut the seam allowance to the end of the stitch and then trim the seam allowance only where it's sewn to the bust cup. We want the rest of the seam allowance in its fullness to sew the rest of the bust cup accurately. Next, we're going to flip the seam allowance toward the inside of the construction and pin the bust cups along the curve. The center front of the bust cups should hit the drill point on the bodice. They don't overlap. Instead, they intersect directly at the seam allowance point. Adjust the gathers accordingly, and then you can sew along the underbust seam. I like to do a little back stitch when I get to the center. It just secures everything there. Remove the basting stitches, then trim the 3 layers of seam allowance closest to the bodice, and overlock the seam allowance that's left. Fold the seam allowance towards the bodice and then top stitch from the right side from edge to edge. Make sure that when you're top stitching at the center point, you move the boning out of the way. Otherwise, you will most likely break a needle. And there you have your full front bodice assembly. Moving on to the back shirred panel. Place your back panels right sides together and sew along the top curved edge. Understitch on the inner layer, then trim the seam allowance and press with your wrong sides together. Using white tailor's chalk, mark the channels according to this diagram on the right side of the back panel. I'm starting with 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters at the bottom for seam allowance and 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter from the top for the first elastic channel. Then from that bottom line, we're going to do 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter, then a 1 inch gap, then a 3/8 of an inch gap, and then 1 inch, and so on until you reach the top. And just make sure that your markings are level. I had to go back and straighten the lines because they were slanted a bit. And also a little tip, an old toothbrush is great for erasing lines that you don't want. Stitch along each line to create channels for the elastic. And I also recommend that you alternate the direction of your stitch so that the top layer doesn't shift to one side. Cut your 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter wide elastic according to the chart and feed into each 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter channel, securing with a pin on each end. And if anyone's wondering, that is the clover loop pressing bar. A lot of people ask me about that little tool that feeds elastic through. It's really great, so now you know what it is. Stitch the ends of the elastic 3/8 or 1 centimeter from the edge. This is an 1/8 shy of the full 1/2 inch seam allowance. And before taking out your pin as you sew, make sure you get your machine needle into the elastic first so that you don't accidentally lose the elastic and have to refeed it through. Now we're going to add the side back panels, so place raw ends of the straps at the notches of the side back panels, then place the second layer of the side back panel right sides together over it so that the straps are sandwiched between. Sew across the top and the armhole. Next, we're going to trim the seam allowance, but don't trim the strap. and then you're going to turn out and press the seam. Place the side panels right sides together to the center back shirred panel. And then just like the other seams, we're going to wrap the free sides snugly around the top of the shirred panel and down to the bottom, pinning all 4 layers in place. Then sew together slowly, ensuring that all 4 layers are aligned. And turn out to a clean finished back bodice. And again, you can totally sew this normally, just right sides together and then an overlock or a zigzag stitch to finish the raw edges. If you would like to add a side zipper to your dress, skip to the Style A zipper insertion chapter. Place your front and back side panels right sides together, and we're going to do this same thing again. Wrap the free side of the back snugly around the top of the front side panel and down to the bottom, pinning all 4 layers in place, and sew together slowly, ensuring that all layers are aligned. Some people have trouble getting in and out of the dress without a zipper. You can test this by sewing the sides of your bodice together with a basting stitch and seeing if you also find it difficult to get in. This will determine if you should go ahead without a zipper or not. And here I'm just ensuring that I snugly align the top 2 seams together so that there's no ridge when I turn it out. Then finish the other side in the same way. And then turn out to your completed bodice. At this point, I also realized my straps were twisted, so I just pulled them out and rethreaded them through the bodice channel properly. You can do this at any time you're sewing this dress. If you twist it, you can always just rethread it. If you are sewing the blouse, skip to the blouse chapter at this point. To start, you're going to overlock the sides of each skirt panel and all the edges of the 4 pocket bags. Place your pocket bags right sides together to the right side of the skirt front and the back at the notches. Sew at 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. And this is so that these seams get hidden when we sew it together with our 1/2 inch seam allowance. Fold the seam allowance outward and understitch on the pocket bag. Place front and back skirt right sides together, lining up the pocket bag seams and pin in place. Sew from the top a 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters past the top edge of the pocket bag, then pivot and sew around the pocket bag. Pivot again when you reach the skirt and sew the rest of the seam. Fold the pocket bags towards the front skirt and snip the back seam allowance above and below the pocket bag opening, and then press the seams open. If you like, you can pin the pocket bags to the front of the skirt and stitch them to the skirt. I really like this, but I should have used lighter fabric for the pocket bags because it did make my skirt look a bit stiff in that area. So just keep that in mind. You can always take this out too if you don't like it. And that is the skirt completed. Next, we are going to assemble the skirt to the bodice. Place the skirt and bodice waist right sides together, matching the front center notch, the side seams, and the center back notch. Stretch the shirred panel to match the skirt and pin in place. Then you're just going to sew the waist seam, and when you're done with it, you're just going to overlock it, or you can use a zigzag stitch to finish those raw edges. Then you can finger press or iron press the seam toward the hem. Last but not least, we have the hem. This is our final step. So we are going to fold the hem at 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters twice and stitch along the inner fold to finish. Give that dress a press, and you are completely finished your Spaghetti Dream Frock. Be sure to share your make with me with hashtag Spaghetti Dream Frock on Instagram and tag me at Lydia Naomi Studio so I can see and share it. Some people have mentioned that they find it a little difficult to get into the dress with only the back shirring, so I'm including instructions for adding a side zipper. And just a note, you may consider leaving out the pockets entirely, or at least on the side that you apply the zipper, if you want even more room to get into the dress. To start, you're going to overlock the sides of each skirt panel and all the edges of the 4 pocket bags. Place your pocket bags right sides together to the right side of the skirt front and the back at the notches. So at 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. And this is so that these seams get hidden when we sew it together with our 1/2 inch seam allowance. Fold the seam allowance outward and understitch on the pocket bag. I recommend stay stitching the top edges of the skirt. This will help it not stretch as we handle it before we attach it to the bodice. To stay stitch, sew 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter from the waist edge with a regular stitch. And make sure at this point that you've overlocked the sides of the front and back bodice. On your front skirt, place the bodice right side together at the waist seam, matching the center notch, and pin together. Also do the same for the back. and then sew together. And finish with an overlock. Now we are ready to apply the zipper. So with right sides facing up, place your front and back dress side by side for zipper insertion. You may find that you will need to loosen the shoulder strap to have everything lay flat. Choose the side that will be on your right if you are right-handed and left if you are left-handed for easier handling. Mark a notch 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters above the pocket bag on both sides for the end point of the zipper. And again, if you want your zipper longer, you can eliminate the pocket entirely and sew your zipper down to the bottom pocket bag notch. And you're going to want a 20 to 22 inch zipper for that. Open your zipper and rolling back the coil, iron the zipper flat. This will really help you sew really close to the zipper coils, making your zipper truly invisible. This is especially important if your zipper doesn't match your fabric. Place one side of your zipper right sides together to the dress edge, lining up that top nib with the very edge of the bodice armhole. Pin in place from the armhole to the notch, making sure the coil is right at the sew line. So this means that the tape of the zipper will be about 1/8 of an inch or 6 millimeters from the side of the dress. Sew in place with an invisible zipper foot, ending your back stitch exactly at the notch. Next, we're going to zip up the zipper and mark the waist seam and end notch on the unsewn side of the zipper tape. Then we're going to unzip and apply right sides together to the other side of the dress and make sure that we're pinning the top nib at the armhole and the marked locations at the waist and end notch so that those areas will line up exactly. And we're going to sew in place in the same way. Once the zipper is sewn, fold the extended tape at the top of the zipper behind each seam and using a regular zipper foot, stitch in place. Once I zipped it up, I noticed that my seam wasn't perfectly aligned, so I actually ended up removing the stitches about an inch or so above and below the problem area. I realigned it and sewed it again to fix this. Next, we're going to finish below the zipper, and we're going to finish the remaining side seam. So place your dress right sides together and line up the pocket and seams below the zipper end, pinning in place. Using a zipper foot, stitch about a 1 to 1.5 inch or 2.5 to 3.8 centimeter section from the start of the pocket bag to just beside the end of the zipper, backstitching at the start and end. Then you can switch to a regular sewing foot, and starting where you left off, sew from that stitch to the pocket bag notch, pivot and sew around the pocket until you get to the bottom pocket notch, then pivot again to sew to the hem. If you have a longer zipper like I do, snip the zipper where the pocket bag starts. Sew across the coils with a wide stationary zigzag stitch, so I do a width of 5 and a length of 0. Then you can tack both ends of the tape to each side of the seam allowance using a narrow stationary zigzag stitch. So I used a width of 2 and a length of 0. And make sure you're stitching only through the seam allowance, not the outside of the dress. Next, we're going to finish the other side of the dress from armhole to hem. Press each side seam open with the pocket bag pressed towards the front of the dress. So to do this, we're going to snip the back seam allowance to the seam, allowing those seams to open. And we're also doing this for the unzipped side as well. Finish the hem by folding and pressing up a 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters along the entire length of the hem. Then you can use this as a guide while sewing to fold in another 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters and sew along the inner fold to finish. Give that dress a press and you are completely finished your Spaghetti Dream Frock. Be sure to share your make with me with hashtag Spaghetti Dream Frock on Instagram and tag me at Lydia Naomi Studio so I can see and share it. This portion of the video contains instructions for adding the peplum to the bodice. Style A bodice is sampled here, but the same instructions apply for the Style B bodice. Take your hem ruffles and mark the center of each piece on one side. This will be the side that attaches to the bodice. Place right sides together and sew the short ends together. Then press these open. Sew a pair of basting stitches along the notched edge, starting and restarting at each seam so that you have 2 pairs of pullable tails to gather with. The first base stitch should be 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters from the edge, and the second stitch should be 5/8 of an inch or 1.6 centimeters from the edge. This creates a sort of tunnel to neatly stitch the gathers to the bodice later. These stitches will be removed after application to the bodice. Place the bodice ruffle right sides together to the bodice hem, matching center notches and side seams. On the front, pull up the bobbin threads to gather the hem ruffle to match the width of the front bodice on each side. On the back, match the hem ruffle to the center shirred portion without gathering, and then you're going to gather the remainder of the hem ruffle to match the back side panels. Then you're going to remove the basting stitches by pulling the tails that you originally pulled together and zigzag or overlock to finish. Then you're going to finger press the seam towards the bodice. So that just means pushing the seam towards the bodice and kind of pressing it between your fingers. You can also top stitch this area. Just remember to remove the boning piece out of the way if you choose to top stitch. Then we're going to finish the hem by folding and pressing up 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters along the entire length of the hem. And then when we get to the machine, we're going to use this as a guide while sewing to fold in another 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters and sewing along the inner fold to finish. And that is your blouse complete. Don't hesitate to share this with me on Instagram by tagging me at Lydia Naomi Studio and using my hashtag Spaghetti Dream Frock. This portion of the video contains instructions for the Style B dress plus the gathered skirt and side zipper. To incorporate the sleeve, cut your pattern piece 4 according to the diagram. Start by using an 18mm bias tape maker to fold the sides of your straps to the center. It's also easy enough to fold the sides in by hand, then press the folds together. Note that the straps for Style B are not cut on fold. Fold one end of each strap. I've been seeing this end fold technique everywhere and I've been wanting to use it, so what you do is you fold down the top and then fold in one side twice, and then tuck the remaining edge inside that fold. And it's a super clean end. Then sew across the folded end and the long folded edge to create 2 straps. And just a tip, I like to use a piece of lightweight paper to get the stitch started. Next, we're going to do the bust cups. Place your bust cups right sides together and sew across the top at 1/2 inch or 13mm. Then open the seam and understitch on the inner bust cup. At the center front of each bust cup, fold in 1/4 inch or 6mm twice and sew along the folded edge. Sew 2 rows of stitches across the top of the bust cups. The first should be 1/2 inch or 13mm from the seam, and the second should also be 1/2 inch or 13mm from the first stitch. This creates the ruffle and the bust tie strap channel. And you may be wondering why I'm turning my work 180 degrees and sewing forward instead of backstitching. This is just a neater way of starting and ending a backstitch. Because this is going to be seen, I just want it to be as neat as possible. It's front and center on the garment, so this is how I make that happen. Locate the notches along the base of the bust cups and sew 2 rows of basting stitches between them. Sew your first stitch at 1/4 inch or 6mm from the edge, and the second stitch 5/8 of an inch or 1.6 centimeters from the edge. Feed through the bust ties with the finished ends towards the center and the raw end at the armhole. Then sew the bust ties in place at the side seam. Then gather the base of the bust cups. They will be adjusted later to match the front of the bodice. Moving on to the front bodice. Sew a pair of stitches 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter apart down the center of the two center front bodice panels to create a boning channel. Insert a piece of boning that is 4 7/8 of an inch or 12.4 centimeters long. This length leaves room for stitching the seam allowances. And just a note, the boning preserves the center front point from collapsing. Next, sandwich the center front panel between the right sides of the 4 side panels, 2 on each side. Sew together, then top stitch close to the seam. Next, we're going to assemble the bodice to the cups. So line up the inner bodice edge at the center dot of the cup cutout, right sides together. Gather the bust cup to match the bust cutout. Pin in place so that the outer edges match. Do this for both sides. And then you're going to stitch together and make sure you move the boning piece out of the stitch path. Backstitch at the center front. Remove the basting stitches, then trim the 3 layers of seam allowance closest to the bodice. Then you can overlock the seam allowance. Now you can gather the bust along the bust tie straps and tie the bow. I find this part so satisfying, it just really makes me excited to finish the dress. Fold the seam allowance towards the bodice and top stitch from the right side from edge to edge, keeping the boning piece out of the way. A little top stitching tip here. I didn't like how this top stitch turned out, a bit too wobbly for me, even though I was sewing very carefully. So I ended up removing it, and with my second attempt, I lengthened my stitch. And as you can see here, it's so much neater. Now we move on to the back faux shirring panel. So place the back panels right sides together and sew along the top curved edge. Understitch on the inner layer, then trim the seam allowance and press with wrong sides together. Do the same for the side back panels. Using a disappearing marking tool like this chalk, mark the channels according to this diagram on the right side of the back panel. Make sure your markings are level. Stitch along each line to create channels for the elastic. And I like to alternate the direction of the sewing so that the top layer doesn't shift to one side. Cut your 1/4 inch or 6mm wide elastic according to the chart and feed it into each 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter channel, securing with a pin on each end. And if anyone's wondering, that is the clover loop pressing bar. A lot of people ask me about that little tool that feeds elastic through. It's really great, so now you know what it is. Stitch the ends of the elastic 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter from the edge. And before taking out your pin as you sew, make sure you get your machine needle into the elastic first so that you don't accidentally lose the elastic and have to refeed it through. Now that we've finished the center back panel, we're going to sandwich the center back panel right sides together between the side panel's inner and outer pieces. Make sure the top edge seams are snugly aligned and pin all 4 layers in place on both sides. Sew together slowly, ensuring that all 4 layers are aligned. And then you can turn out to a clean finished back bodice. Just to note that the inside of the back construction has the understitch along the top. The right side or outer side of the construction will not have this stitch. With the right side of your assembled back panel facing up, place the front bodice right side down, aligning the right hand seams. Start by pinning the 2 layers of the front bodice side panel to the top layer of the back panel. Leave the bottom back side panel layer unpinned. Using what is popularly referred to as the burrito method, you can roll both the front and the back bodice so that the 4 side panels are aligned and pinned together. Sew together slowly, ensuring that all 4 layers are aligned. And then you can turn out to a clean finished side bodice. Some people have trouble getting in and out of the dress without a zipper. You can test this by sewing the sides of your bodice together with a basting stitch and seeing if you also find it difficult to get in. This will determine if you should go ahead without a zipper or not. If you're skipping the side zipper insertion, you can do the same steps for the other side to have a fully clean finished bodice. To proceed with the invisible zipper insertion, overlock the remaining edges of your assembled bodice. Moving on to the skirt pocket application. Overlock the sides of each skirt panel and all edges of the 4 pocket bags. Sew 2 rows of basting stitches along the top of the skirt edge for the gathered skirt option. And just a note, if sewing in the peplum, do the same above steps minus the pocket bags, and if sewing the A-line skirt, simply sew a stay stitch along the waistline of the skirt and continue with the following steps. I actually ran out of fabric for all 4 pocket bags, so to conceal this, I added a strip of the pink fabric to the straight edge of the pocket bag and I sewed it down. You'll note that I overlocked the edge. Once I sewed the strip to the pocket bag, I cut off the excess and cut the notches. Then I overlocked the entire bag, making sure that the pieces were mirrored. And of course, this will just ensure that the white of the pocket bag is undetectable. Measure 3.5 inches or 8.9 centimeters from the top edge of the skirt and mark it with a notch. This will be for the pocket bag placement. Now with the right sides together, place the pocket bags at the skirt side seam notches. Sew at 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. Fold the seam allowance outward and understitch on the pocket bag. To understitch, you're just folding all of the seam allowance towards the pocket bag and then stitching really close to the seam. Align the side seams and pocket bags on the right-hand side, right sides together, with the back skirt underneath the top skirt, and pin this in place. Sew from the top a 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters past the top edge of the pocket bag, then pivot and sew around the pocket bag. Pivot again when you reach the skirt and sew the rest of the seam to the hem. This seam must correspond with the closed bodice side seam. And lastly, fold the pocket bag towards the front skirt and snip the back seam allowance above and below the pocket bag and press the seams open. Now we will attach the skirt to the bodice. Place the skirt and the bodice waist right sides together, matching the center front notch, the side seams, and the center back notch. Starting with the back, we're going to stretch the bodice shirred panel to match the skirt and pin in place. Then you're going to gather the remaining back sides of the skirt to match the side back panels. After this, you can gather the front skirt to match the front bodice waist and pin in place. After pinning everything together, sew the waist seam. Next, you can remove the basting stitches from the skirt, and you can also trim the gathered seam allowance to create less bulk. Then overlock everything to finish. Then you're going to press the seam towards the hem. Moving on to the sleeve. Overlock all edges of the sleeve. fold up the hem according to the notch and press in place, and you're folding to the wrong side of the fabric. Then fold in to the wrong side, the cap of the sleeve, a 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters from notch to notch, and press. The sleeve has a single notch to indicate the front side and a double notch to indicate the back side. If you lay out your sleeves with the right side facing up and the front notches in the center, you're going to choose the right hand sleeve to be the open one where the zipper will be inserted. Place the underarm edges right sides together on each sleeve and pin together. On the sleeve that will be open, you're going to locate the sewing end point by folding up the hem and marking where the hem edge ends. That will be where you stop the stitch. For the sewn bodice armhole, sew the entire sleeve underarm seam from top to bottom. For the open bodice armhole, sew the sleeve underarm seam from the sleeve hem to where the edge of the hem fold ends. Press both open and flat. Refold the pre-pressed hem and stitch the first row of stitches close to the edge of the inner fold, leaving a small gap near the underarm seam. Sew the second row 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters towards the hem of the sleeve to create the elastic channel. Using a safety pin, feed in your bicep elastic, which should be the circumference of your bicep plus 2 inches or 5 centimeters. Add more for heavier fabric and less for lighter fabric. And definitely try this on your arm before committing to it. Once you're satisfied with the length, overlap the ends of the elastic about 3/4 of an inch or 1.9 centimeters and sew together. Then pull the elastic into the channel by stretching it, then stitch the channel opening closed. Place the closed sleeve right sides together to the closed armhole of the dress. Pin and sew in place. Place the open sleeve right sides together to the open armhole of the dress, matching front to front and back to back. The back is indicated by a double notch, and sew in place. Overlock the seams to finish. Starting a 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters below the front or back bodice neckline, sew along the inner edge of the folded sleeve caps, backstitching at start and finish. Feed through elastics and pin in place. Try on to see how it fits and adjust if needed. Then, with a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the elastic, sew the ends of the elastic securely to the sleeve where the channel stitch ends. We are now moving on to the zipper. Start by taking your invisible zipper and press the coils away from the tape on your zipper. This will make it easier to sew close to the coils and have a truly invisible construction. Pin one side of the zipper to one side of the open dress seam. The top nib of the zipper should line up with the end of the underarm seam. The bottom of the zipper should stop 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters above the top edge of the pocket bag. Measure and mark this with a notch on both seams before applying your zipper. Start by stitching across the top end of the zipper tape where it lines up with the sleeve elastic channel stitch to secure it in place. I used a close zigzag stitch like a bar tack, but really you can just sew back and forth with a straight stitch. Stitch the zipper in place using an invisible zipper foot. You'll have to start the stitch a 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters or so away from where the sleeve underarm seam ends. Make sure you start with a back stitch. We will hand sew the top of the zipper later. And just a tip, do not sew as close to the zipper teeth anywhere there is a seam, so in the underarm seam area and the waist seam area. I say this because it will make it so much more difficult to zip up if you do. After sewing on one side of the zipper, close the zipper and mark the armhole, waistline seams, and the end point of the zipper on the right side of the unsewn zipper tape. Then unzip and place the remaining side along the other side seam, right sides together, matching up the marks on the zipper to the armhole, waistline seams, and end point. Pin in place and sew in the same way, starting with that preliminary securing stitch and then sewing the length of the zipper, leaving a small area near the start of the zipper unsewn. Then just slip stitch the remaining open areas at the start of the zipper. To finish, we will stitch up the side seam and pocket. Using a regular zipper foot, start by sewing towards the zipper so that you can get as close as possible to the end of the zipper. So for a short ½ inch or so portion, backstitching at the beginning and end. Then turn the dress around and stitch from that stitch down around the pocket bag and to the hem. And this is a close-up of what it looks like. I actually kind of sewed a bit crooked. I did go in and fix that after. So just be aware of this. Turn it out, see if it sticks out or puckers or whatnot. If it doesn't, just leave it. If it does, you'll want to redo this area. Next, we're going to snip above the pocket bag on the back side of the skirt and align the zipper tape with the seams. Stitch the zipper to the seam only, about 2 inches or 5 centimeters below the top of the pocket bag on the one side. Cut off any excess length of the zipper below this stitch, and then finish the end of the zipper with a stationary zigzag stitch. I set my machine to the length of 0 and the width of 5 for the zigzag. Finish by snipping the back seam just below the pocket bag opening and pressing open the seam. Finally, we are finishing by sewing up the hem. So you can either use a rolled hem to finish the hem, or fold the hem 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters twice and stitch along the inner fold to finish. I opted for a rolled hem foot, so you're going to want to start this by pre-folding a small section of the hem 1/8 or 3 millimeters twice, and then place this under the foot using your thumb and forefinger and stitch forward and back. Then lift up your foot with the needle down and feed in the fold of the fabric. Lower your foot again and sew. Keep the fabric curled about 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters as you sew. And when you come to the end, stitch until you're about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters from the beginning stitch, then lift up the foot to remove the hem from the foot while keeping it folded. Let the foot down and stitch to finish. And that completes the dress. Thank you so much for watching. If you made any of the versions of my Spaghetti Dream Frock, be sure to share it with me through my socials on Instagram by tagging me at Lydia Naomi Studio and using my hashtag Spaghetti Dream Frock, because I would love to see and share your work.